I've been a qualified solicitor for over 20 years. I was previously head of employment at a regional law firm. I was an equity partner, so there's not an awful lot I don't know about partnership. I've also, as I said, done little bits of additional areas of law, including licensing. And it came to the middle of last year, and I thought, you know what? I've done the solicitor thing, I've done the partnership thing. I want to do something different. So I've effectively gone out on my own. And I wear two hats. Basically, I am an HR and management consultant on the one hand, but I still do some consultant solicitor work. So I plug into other law firms as and when required, and they use my services. When it comes to the roadmap of my business, I can say hand on heart that it was very much born out of my contacts. So I had a wealth of clients who wanted to follow me, and very helpful law firms who, you know, obviously liked for some reason why how I worked. Do I have a strong business plan? I know where I want to go. I wouldn't necessarily say I've necessarily got it in writing, but I have that focus, and you know, I am quite ambitious. I'm also involved in legal tech, so I am developing legal software with a software provider, because the type of case management systems that you have within law firms are fairly dire. And it's all about the client experience, which has always been a moan to clients using lawyers, that and cost, of course. So yeah, I mean, that's me. Please note that expertise in all things legal is tongue-in-cheek. I wouldn't say that I am an expert in absolutely everything. I've got a good grounding in most areas of law, but that's me.
Hi, and I'm Jo. I've been running my business for 8 years last month. I started my business because I was made redundant, and I basically got fed up of other people having control over my life and my future and that of my family. So I thought I was perfectly capable of messing it up on my own without any external influences. So this very much has been a passion of mine, is to help other people starting up and scaling their business. And I always frame up these sorts of sessions, which I've been doing for about 6 years now, as a do as I say, don't do as I did type of thing, because I did it all totally the wrong way. I didn't have a clue what I was doing when I started, and I, like Adrian, was very much saved and rescued and aided by my contacts, and networking has been my savior. So I'm a chartered marketeer. I'm also a chartered business consultant and a trained teacher as well. And I've delivered marketing and business courses all the way through from A-level, level 3 standard, up to master's degree, working with places like the University of Gloucester and Exeter University and Plymouth University as well, on master's degree programs and so forth. Up until about a year ago, I was a single person business, so very much like some of you. I now employ 4 people because it just went mental during lockdown, and I had to learn a very hard lesson that I can't do it all myself, and I shouldn't do it all myself. And if I want to go and do the things that I love to do, which for most people is spend time with their family, for me it's go and watch the cricket or go fishing on my own or with friends, is I need to learn to delegate. So I'm going through a really steep learning curve in the last year of delegating and not being a control freak. And I'm actually, he's laughing because everyone knows me as being a control freak, but I'm actually doing a lot better than I thought. But this is very much designed to help you avoid some of the pitfalls that I came across in those 8 years, of which there were many, and hopefully you won't come across so many of them. So as we go through the slides, I will share some of the other things that happened during the time, and you're lucky enough or unlucky enough to have me back for things like networking and some of the digital stuff and organizational processes stuff, so you'll hear a bit more there. So I won't bore you now, but I'm based in Yeovil. You might see a small dog in the background, just ignore her. She's quite funny and just comes to work every day. But yeah, just loving what we're doing. So have fun in your businesses is my biggest message.
And the other thing that I'd say is I certainly think that the Somerset business community, the small business community, is absolutely brilliant. The amount of support that I have had and the insight it has given me has been phenomenal.
Yeah, it's really good. And you're really lucky because you've already got a cohort of other people you're going to make friends with, and you'll stay in touch with each other for years to come. So, you know, even if your businesses, which are quite diverse, looking at the list I've written,
That's brilliant.
just, you know, you will learn different lessons to share those lessons. And there's a big misconception, and we'll go into this when we get to the networking session in a few weeks, is that everybody else is your competition, and they're not. They're your allies. So use them because they're much more important to you as allies than anything else.
Yeah.
So we've heard a little bit about your business plans and what you're planning to do and where you've got to. So is there anything anyone else didn't share in their introduction that they want to share at this point before we go into what we're going to cover in this session? Only silence. Fabulous. We're starting well. Okay. So what we're going to cover in this session is we're going to compare different types of legal entities, look at how you register a company, which I know some of you have already done and some of you haven't, and consider which is the right option for you in your business. And it might be during this that you decide that the one that you have chosen isn't the right one. That's absolutely fine. So we'll be able to help you with working out if you need to switch that. We will then take a break, which you'll be pleased to know. And when we come back, we're going to have some fun with company names, how to choose it, where you should look, and making sure that you've covered all your bases when you're looking at your company names. And then we're going to finish up with intellectual property. So once you've got all of your ideas, your names and everything else together, how you protect what you're building so that no one else can take it away from you or damage it, hopefully in any way. So that's what we're planning to cover. We will aim to stop at probably about 45 minutes or so for a break and a session for you to disappear out and grab a coffee or cup of tea or whatever and have a think. We'll pose you a little bit of a question. We have got a bit of a scenario at the end to see what your advice would be, and we'll just take it from there.
Excellent.
So I will pass over to Adrian.
Thank you. So the first thing I think is really important from a boring legal perspective, if I can put it like that, is to actually understand what we mean by a legal entity, because that is absolutely key to understanding where your relationship with your business actually lies. So it'd be really helpful just for you to shout out in simple terms what you think a legal entity is.
Silence is golden.
Intellectual
How you pay your
property.
taxes.
So say that again, Kieran.
I was just being flippant about paying your taxes.
Nothing flippant about paying your taxes.
And someone, I think someone said intellectual property, which is it's a mechanic of the legal entity. It's not necessarily the legal entity itself. So does anyone else have any thoughts? I mean, are we as individuals legal entities?
That's what I was going to ask. Is there a definition or distinct difference between being sole trader and a limited company?
Because
the limited bit.
Yeah, that's because I was under the impression that because I'm a sole trader currently, and I'm in that sort of grey area where, because I work with schools and I've got data and I've got loads of those things.
Yeah.
If something were to go wrong legally, they can challenge me personally and take me to court. Whereas if it is structured in a way, either like a CIC or something over here, you can tell I'm a teacher, I use my hands a lot, but over here, this thing that I'm associated with as a CEO or director or whatever, that's responsible for the stuff. That makes sense?
Yes.
That's exactly what you've read the slides already, so we're going to go through that in more detail at different stages.
I'm not sure I have. The terminology I used, I don't think is in the slides.
No, I think that's absolutely that's
a
a really, really good high level definition of what we're really talking about here. And it's absolutely fundamental that when we're setting up a business or thinking about going into business, we understand what the pitfalls are. And as a lawyer, I'm trained to be really, really pessimistic about things. So I look at where things go horribly wrong and say, actually, how do I protect myself? How do I protect myself as an individual? How do I protect, I don't know, my house, my family? And that's where I think we need to start this conversation. All right. So basically on this slide, we've put up a some fairly wordy definitions, but we are all legal entities in ourselves. As individuals, we're legal entities. We have our own obligations in whether that be criminal or civil. We all have to behave in a certain way. We're all subject to the rules which make up society. Okay, so as individuals, we are legal entities, and because we're legal entities, it follows that if things go wrong and if someone has a, I don't know, has a issue with us, we can be sued as a legal entity. So for example, you might have a dispute with a neighbour, and the neighbour might decide that they've got a boundary dispute with you, and they can sue you on the basis that they think that you've nicked about a foot of land from them, something like that. But it's broader than that, because within as a legal entity, that doesn't prevent you from creating your own legal entity. And that's where really companies come in, and partnerships, because you can effectively flip your own personal legal entity and actually say, well, I want to protect myself within this. I want to create something which is altogether different, and in the eyes of the law is viewed as being different, so that I am actually ultimately protected as an individual. And that's really important.
Yeah, so there's lots and lots of different types of legal entities. So we're going to just go through the main bodies, and then we're going to compare the two most common. Now,
Absolutely.
I know, as Kieran, you talked about CICs, so we're not focusing on CICs, but we will talk to you about CICs. So please, on each of these slides, we will try and incorporate that, but we will go through these as well. So most of us will have started off or considered being a sole trader or an individual entrepreneur. Okay, and in this instance, the key part here is there is no legal distinction between the owner and the business. Okay, and the owner retains all the profits for the business and is personally liable for all debts. Okay, we're going to go into all of these in a bit more detail, but these are just so that everyone understands what the legal entities are. Then we also have partnerships. And I think, Adam, was it with your family? You may be considering a partnership. No, sorry, Steve, my apologies. You may be considering a partnership model, or it may be a limited company with directors. Partnerships and limited companies are different, but you can have a limited liability partnership. You will have all this information on slides afterwards in a handout.
Sorry,
can I
Joe,
just touch on
Adam is
Sorry.
the other half of Milton and Chambers. All right, so we are
I see.
a partnership, a registered partnership.
Fantastic.
Okay.
Right, that's brilliant. I will do a little arrow so I understand what's going on there. Thank you.
And can I just touch on one thing which always rankles with me, because I hear it on news outlets, including the likes of the BBC. Quite often, the reference to a firm will be made with reference to a company. They're two distinct things. A firm is a partnership. You know, so if you have created a firm, that is a partnership. That's the legal entity. But so often the terminology is interchangeable. It rankles with me simply because I am a technocrat.
Yeah. Welcome to the solicitor in the room.
Absolutely.
Adam, thank you. You're putting in the chat. I know you can't talk, but yeah, absolutely. Thank you for clarifying that as well. So then we come on to types of companies. So you have private limited companies, you have public limited companies, and you have unlimited companies. And there's some information about each of them there. The important thing, and the one we're going to focus on for the rest of this morning, is about the private limited companies, because that's the most distinct difference to the sole trader, where you have that limited liability. And we're going to talk to you about that and how that operates in reality, in the real world, rather than just in the world of definitions on a PowerPoint screen.
And it's worth saying that unlimited companies are very, very rare.
Very rare.
Can I ask? Sorry to bother you.
That's right.
When I was in my mentor meeting, they were talking about possibly setting up as a trading as until you reach sort of X amount of turnover, and then to change into. So I just wondered if we were touching upon that as well this morning.
Yes, we will talk about that as well, Lucy. Yes. We also have legal entities which are CICs and CIOs, which obviously Kieran is a CIC, and these are social enterprises. These are what we used to term very loosely as not-for-profit, and we aren't talking about charities here. We're talking about something that is almost seen as a bit of a halfway house between a full-blown charity like the RSPCA or British Heart Foundation and a limited company, and they have a very different set of rules, very different set of reporting, which we're not going to cover in detail today, I'm afraid, but we can take questions and talk to you separately about that, Kieran, or anyone else who wants to find out more about that, because there's a very, very different set of rules and considerations if you're looking at setting up a CIC or CIO.
As you've done recently.
As I have done recently, yes. Yes.
I just realised that there's weird tax, there's strange reporting rules, aren't there?
Yes, there's a lot of reporting rules. I've literally, my phone just pinged up in front of me, and my application to register a CIC has just been approved in the last 5 minutes. So slightly excited. So Kieran, we can catch up on all of that, because we'll be learning all of this together. So, you know, business happening live as we talk. So we're now going to look at and compare some of the differences between sole traders and limited companies as the two most common ways that we think you're going to be looking at setting up. So, Adrian, I will pass over to you.
So let's just go back for a second and look at legal entity. So we've explained that as individuals, you are a legal entity in yourself. And that's really what a sole trader is. So as a sole trader, you're saying, I'm trading on my own as Lucy, as Julia, as Kieran, whoever else. And on that basis, therefore, I don't have any kind of commercial wrapper. I don't have any kind of commercial protection. It is me alone, as if you were trading in your private capacity. So that obviously is really simple, and it means that you can get off the ground quickly, and there's not a huge amount of the reporting rules that you have with a company. But the downside, of course, is that you don't necessarily have legal protection that you might want to, because it is you, and ultimately if something goes horribly wrong, then you are obviously ultimately carry the can. So, for example, if I were to create as a sole trader a business whereby I manufacture widgets, and one of the widgets were to go horribly wrong and cause a personal injury, I would potentially be liable. Now, you'll probably have insurance to cover yourself with for all of that, but the risk is still there. Okay, so the sole trader model is simple. It's very, very cost effective as a starter package, if you like, but it does carry innate legal risk, okay, which you can mitigate by way of insurance, but you know, there is always the possibility that something might come out and bite you. When it comes to a limited company, what you're effectively doing is you're effectively saying, well, I as an individual am operating within something else, which is another legal entity. So a limited company is basically, in the eyes of the law, its own person, if you like. So ultimately, you're saying it's not me who's responsible. It's not ultimately my house which is on the line. It's not my money which is necessarily on the line. The company in itself is responsible for anything that goes wrong. Okay, so it's one step removed from you as an individual. And Go on.
Sorry, you jumped the slide, so I'm just putting the correct slide. I just found it. So this is what Adrian is talking about, put a bit more succinctly. As a sole trader, you don't have the same protection as a limited company. When I set up my company, having been made redundant, my children were about 13 and 8. And for me, I was very, very determined it was going to be a limited company, because I was delivering a service where I was giving advice that could potentially go wrong or be misinterpreted. For me, it was very important to be a limited company, because no one could come into my personal home, bearing in mind I was also working from home. So that was the address on the business, where no one could come in and take away the sofa or the telly or the cooker or anything like that if I totally messed it up. I also made sure that I had insurance, but it is very important, if you're also trading from your house, to consider that that address becomes public knowledge then, and it becomes part of the identity of your business, whether it's a sole trade business seen as perceived as a business, or whether it is a limited company that is formally set up.
It's worth just saying there that that doesn't necessarily need to be too much of a problem, because what you can do, for example, is you can register your business with, say, your accountant. So it doesn't have to be your own home or business address.
But for most people with a sole trader, it tends to be, because you're setting up as an easier business. And if we go back and look at the cost of startup, one of the attractions to be a sole trader is it's significantly cheaper to set up as a sole trader, but and significantly quicker. You literally only have to let HMRC know that you're setting up as a sole trader. And a lot of people do this when they're setting up a business, because we go through this period of, I'm going to work 5 days a week in my employed job, then I'm going to cut it down to 4 days, 3 days, 2 days. So you get rid of the paid employed job as you grow your business on one side. That is quite often seen as a lot easier to be done as a sole trader. And then, as Lucy was saying, when you reach a certain stage, people register as a business. And that's absolutely right for a lot of people, because it gives that flexibility without this outlet of money that not everybody has when they start a business. In the second half of this session, I'm going to show you how easy it is to set up a business as a limited company. So you'll see some of these myths dispelled there. But it is really true to say that actually, if both of them are run correctly, running a limited company costs you a lot more, but it does offer you a bit more protection. Run incorrectly, a limited company is still safer than an incorrect sole trader status. And then one of the things to consider as a sole trader is, a lot of people, particularly, I had a friend who set up a cleaning business. She ran it as a sole trader. All the money was paid into the same account that paid for her rent and her food and her kids' school dinners and school uniform. The compliance on accounting as a sole trader is actually harder than that as a limited company, I found. So there's different pros and cons in there, and you'll find it out. And when we send you off in a little bit, we're going to ask you to consider some of these pros and cons within the context of your own businesses.
So is everyone clear about that?
I think so.
Yeah. Feel free, if there's anything you want us to clarify, just jump in, because we will talk for England, the pair of us.
Well, I was just going to ask you, my neighbour's an accountant. When I sort of left school and we were talking about this, I was under the sort of, because I did a bit of reading around it. I think that's why I understood the sort of that almost one step removed element. Sorry if you can hear a baby screaming in the background. I apologise. But a 7-week-old baby in the house. Is the sense of, she was almost sort of trying to encourage me not to go down that route until there was like X amount of money coming through the business. And I was a bit like, well, everything I read, I was a bit on the fence about whether that was right or wrong or necessary.
What we'd do is, accountants, I'm married to an accountant, okay, so I can speak with some authority on this. Accountants are very focused on what's it going to cost.
Yeah,
and because your neighbour is your friend, your neighbour is probably giving you very good advice based on helping you save money to set up.
Yes.
And we've quite often find that businesses that we work with are in that bit where they're going, well, it's easier to be a sole trader because it costs me less. And as long as I've got a separate bank account or a book where I write everything down, or a spreadsheet, that's fine. we're going to go through all this. When we come to just before the break, Joe, I'm going to ask you to all to go away and do some pros and cons.
Yeah.
So we'll revisit that whole
Yeah.
conversation in a minute. But if we show you a
that's
few
great.
more facts first. But you're not on your own, and I'm not saying that your accountant neighbour is wrong, but you have to make the decision based on a number of different facts.
I think
and
that
hopefully
was,
we'll be able to shed a bit of light on that for you.
A sort of a motivation in the sense of, because it's early days, it would cost you this amount to run your business as a limited company, and actually it might not be at this stage beneficial to you. Whereas I think what you were saying just a minute ago, in the sense of a layer of protection, particularly working with schools and data, and recourse for anything that were to go wrong, like I don't know, like a broken server, and I were to lose lots of student information. I honestly, I panic about that most days.
So that's a different level of protection as well with the company as well. So there's different ways you can protect that, even if you're a sole trader. So we'll come to that as well. Okay. What these slides are going to tell you is kind of a bit about what the textbooks say, and a bit about this is the facts of the matter. In a minute, when we get to the end of these slides, Adrian and I are going to share a little bit of our own journeys and what the reality actually has been for us, which might not be the same reality it will be for you. But we'll give you some facts first, then we'll give you our experiences, and then we'll send you away to think about it and have a coffee.
And Joe, it's worth just saying that you will always get different opinions from different professions, because as a lawyer, I'm looking at the legal risks, they're looking at the financial risks. So, and that's why I think the pros and cons section of this will be really helpful, because it allows you to balance that.
Okay. So we've talked about the cost of startup. We've talked about the liability and the protection it offers you. Now, someone mentioned as well, I think it was Adam, there's also reporting and tax considerations in there. So does everyone know the difference between corporation tax, PAYE and VAT?
Should we just run through those?
We'll just run through them. So very simply, corporation tax is a tax on your business. PAYE is a tax on you. And VAT is a tax on your products or services, your stuff. And you're stuffed, because no matter which way you look at it, you can't get away from tax. Yes. So don't try, because when you try, that's when you'll make a mistake and it will come back and bite you.
Oh, I thought we were going to be covering shell companies at some point.
Yeah, offshore accounts in the case of everything, Joe.
Oh.
There we go.
This is recorded, Joe, just to remind you.
Oh, damn, yeah. I've just incriminated myself, haven't I?
Right. Make a little note in red here.
I'm sure someone in the council can edit this out.
There is quite a lot of, it doesn't matter whether you're a limited company or a sole trader, you are still liable to pay tax. And sole traders pay tax on their business profits after expenses have been deducted via the self-assessment scheme. If you are a company director of a limited company, you still have to do that self-assessment. Okay, so that fits into both. The deadline is the same for companies, for directors, or for sole traders, 31st of January at the end after your tax year ends. And your tax year runs for 365 days from the day you set up your company. So my end of tax year is the 31st of May. Okay, so that is my business financial year. The tax year runs from April to April, as we know. The calendar year runs from January to December. The school year runs from September to August. There is lots of different ways. You will be reporting your end of year, your company's end of year. So for me, from June to May, by the 31st of January. And you have to do that every year. And you have a certain number of months that you can complete it in, depending on where your tax year starts and stops in your financial year in your business. If it runs at the end of December, then you're kind of stuffed, because you've got a month to get your tax return in. If you're like me and it's May, you've got half a year, which is great. I am married to an accountant. He normally does it in June. It's fine. So as a director of a company, you're also obliged. Yes, sorry, I don't know what's happened to my teeth today. Someone else's teeth.
Obligated, I like that one.
Thank you. To do your own personal tax return, and as a company, you are liable for corporation tax, which is payable 9 months after your company year end. So this is where I fall foul, because my company year end is also falls in line with that being payable by the end of January. So end of January is when all my tax bills come in, if I pay them there. You can pay them earlier and you can pay in instalments now. You can set up direct debits to pay in advance. So if you think your corporation tax bill, which is paid at 20% of your company profit, is going to be a couple of £1,000, you can prepay £100, £150, £200 a month to HMRC on direct debit so that you're paying in instalments. But you have to set that up before your end of year, not afterwards. So I cannot now pay my corporation tax in instalments between now and January, but I can start paying for next year's between now and next May. Does that make sense? But as Adrian says,
that's the first time I've
tax.
heard that end of year for a company. That's interesting. I've not heard that before. Oh, well, I've heard it but not understood it, put it that way.
Yeah. So imagine, you know, we run on so many different calendars. It's ridiculous, isn't it? We've got the chronological year, we've got the school year, and we've got the tax year. Okay, and that's even if you're just employed or just going about your business doing nothing. When you run a business, you also have your business year, and that's from whatever date it is. You can apply to have your business year changed. So for example, you work for 9 months and you have a short business year, and then you align it with another calendar that you happen to like better or makes more sense to your business, to your planning, for example. So a lot of seasonal businesses will do this. Hospitality, holiday lets, things like that will align that so that they have their busy period and then their year ends during the quiet period, so they've got that time to do all the business admin and so forth in depth. You can do that, but you have to apply to HMRC and they will decide. I've never known them say no. Okay, so it's very straightforward. So
they're only interested in the money.
They're only interested in the money. So as long as you're paying them, they're quite happy. So you can apply for that change. So if you end up with 6 or 7 different years and calendars and 12-month periods all happening, it does make sense to align some of them. But think about these liabilities for paying a corporation tax or doing your self-assessments in certain periods after your company financial year before you do it, because the last thing you want to be doing is spending Christmas and New Year doing your tax returns and sorting out all your bills, when actually you should be having a couple of weeks off to enjoy yourself or whatever you do at Christmas or whatever. So think about how it fits into your bigger life, because I didn't. And I do my tax returns between Christmas and New Year every year.
And presumably your financial, the financial section will deal with this in far more detail.
It should do, yeah. So hopefully you'll learn that on the next session. But we will also pick it up, I think it's session 8, when we're doing about how to set up your company and the organisational structure and things like that as well.
Yeah.
But it's worth mentioning here because it has an implication on the legal entities as well.
Would you say it's beneficial to get an accountant from the get-go then, so that you can sort all this out?
Yes.
No.
Well, we have a different opinion here, but it depends on your appetite for actually doing it yourself, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I mean, exactly that. It depends on sort of your level. Do you need to, is it a legal obligation to have an accountant? No. Is it sensible to do it? Sometimes, but then you incur those costs. It depends on a lot of things. I didn't have a company accountant until this year that we're just starting now. Although on my husband's account, I do my own accounts and have done for 8 years and have been very happy doing that. It's only now because I'm employing staff that I've chosen to take on an accountant, because because of all the different advantages and grants and things like that, that the accountant that I've taken on isn't a normal accountant. There's nothing normal about my accountant, in fact, but she will also look for advantages and grants and do those sorts of applications for me and look for funding. So I've got a slightly different arrangement, but it's safer too. So again, when you're looking at limiting your liability, it's always worth going and talking to a couple of accountants and getting some advice and then making a decision yourself, Julia. You might decide that actually you're going to have an accountant as you set up, and then you feel confident to do things yourselves. But a lot of that's going to depend on whether you're employing staff, whether you've got stock, premises, things like that. My business as a consultancy is quite straightforward. I'm not holding stock. I'm not having to look at things like depreciation and stuff that you're going to learn in a fortnight's time. So I won't bore you in that, but there are advantages to both ways.
Yeah, neither's ours. It's going to be web-based.
Yeah.
Just me and Martin.
I'm just loving Adam's comment there. There's nothing normal about any accountant. I think that sums it all up.
But there's another huge advantage with using an accountant, which is that they have professional indemnity insurance, and part of the reason why you're paying them such a potentially significant sum of money is that you're buying into that protection, so that if they make a mistake, it's on their watch, not yours.
Yeah.
But we've still got to have that, haven't we? We've all still got
You
to
get
have
your own.
You have your own, but
insurance.
yours isn't for financial activity. So
Yeah.
as a director, if you're a limited company, there's liability on you as a director as well. We'll cover it briefly, but you're going to cover it in depth in a fortnight. And when we come to the organisational bit, we're going to cover it again because it is so important to make sure you've got it right.
Yeah.
Okay. So profit and loss, we hope you all make lots and lots of profits and not lots and lots of losses. However, it is absolutely okay to make some losses because you can carry them forward to offset tax bills. Okay, so if you've got an accountant, your accountant will help you make the right amount of profit and the right amount of loss, hopefully to minimise any tax bills. This isn't being recorded, this is being recorded. We're going to be really careful here. As a sole trader, your losses can become out of your own individual accounts as well, because you are effectively the same entity as that business. So being a limited company protects your personal finances to a degree from any losses the company may incur. Okay, so that's another level of protection that's worth considering. So say, for example, Joe, your server does go skewy and your data gets scrounged and someone tries to sue you. As a limited company, that money would come from the company to make that settlement, not necessarily from your personal account. Although as a director of a limited company, you have got an obligation as a director to run that company in the correct way, and you can be sued separately, but that's all never going to happen because you're going to be insured and all the rest of it. And the most important thing you can do for your company is not hire an accountant. It is make sure you've got the right amount of insurance for your business activities. Your insurance is your best protection against anything, irrespective of which legal entity you do choose. Adam, is there a template and guide on how to fill in a tax return that can be submitted? Yeah, there is, Adam. You can go in there, you get given a UTR, which is a unique tracking reference, not some sort of thing you need antibiotics for. And as one of my students once said to me, and you can go in there and you can print off the form and you can fill it in longhand and then you submit it online. And as long as you've got your accounts yourself and you're using something like Xero or QuickBooks or Sage or a good spreadsheet, good package, lots of those will produce a report for you in the correct format for your tax return as well. So it's all about your record keeping. Do you need insurance against a HMRC audit? Depends what you're doing, Adam. Maybe we should have a talk after this. But no, in theory, you shouldn't, but your accountant will give, if you do have one, will give you that added level of protection as well. So corporation tax is charged. Limited companies, any losses you make can be set against future profits so that you can reduce tax bills in future years, or you can reclaim tax that you've already paid in previous years. So if I had a massive tax bill of £10,000 this year for my corporation tax and next year I make a loss, I can offset that loss and claim back some of the tax I paid this year against that loss.
Yeah.
So that's important thing that you can do with a limited company that you cannot do with a sole trader. Your profits are taxed based on your earnings as a sole trader as well. So you and your company being intrinsically one entity, your tax allowances are affected that way, but you will learn more about that next week. You have to obviously file your accounts, as we said. You have to do your annual accounts, and a limited company accounts done on Companies House costs you £13 to submit, 13. So it is quite straightforward if you are keeping your records of your trading correctly. Sole traders are not legally required to have annual accounts or file for inspections, but you must keep a record of business expenses and your personal income for your own self-assessment tax return purposes. And the penalties for getting your self-assessment wrong are higher than those for getting your business accounts wrong. So if you get your self-assessment wrong as a sole trader, or as a limited company, you will be in more trouble than if you get your business accounts wrong. Okay. So the other reason
Can I ask what's the difference between, you were just saying, between a limited company, a private limited company, and a I've got what's in...
There's an unlimited company, which is very, very unusual, and I wouldn't even suggest we go there. Yeah. And then there's obviously public limited companies, which are the ones on the stock exchange.
Right. Okay. Sorry, I was thinking of what Jo was saying. She was saying that you're more likely the penalty's higher.
So that's your self-assessment.
Yes.
So
right.
you have to, as a company director of a limited company, I still have to submit a self-assessment every year, as well as my company accounts. As a sole trader, I would only have to do the self-assessment part because I don't have a company to submit accounts for.
And I suppose that's what Julie was asking earlier, is perhaps, and that's the situation I would find myself in, I think, as everyone, well, a few others in the group, is if you think you're going to go down that company route, then you're almost having to do 2 sets of accounts because you're doing your personal financial return plus the company's. So that's where it possibly makes sense to have an accountant to handle all of that.
I would agree with that. I mean, when it comes to me, for instance, I'm even more confused, for want of a better expression, at the moment, because I'm coming out of a partnership. Because obviously there is the delay before the partnership accounts.
Yeah.
I'm also a sole trader when it comes to the consultant solicitor work I do, but I also have my own company.
Right.
So as you can imagine, it's all a bit of a...
Adrian just decided to tick every box.
I decided to make it as complicated as I
I'll have one of everything, please.
But you're absolutely right. Because you are taking money from the business by way of dividend, that is going to be your personal income, for which there will be a tax return.
Yes.
In your personal capacity, but there's also going to be obviously corporation tax to pay as well.
Yes, yeah. I think that's what I've been currently doing. Is I do my own accounts because my income is very simplistic. Schools pay out like a lump sum for a year. There's only X number of schools. That's my income. That's my outgoing. Drawing up my accounts is relatively straightforward. I worry going forward to create a limited company or create a company accounts. I've got to separate all that out, and then I've got to work out where are the little benefits to draw accounts or dividends and all that stuff. And I think it seems, I mean, I'm talking for myself, but it seems logical to go down the accountant route, and get them to...
I think you're right. I think I think it's money worth spent if you don't want to be spending time yourself doing that. You know, it's a bit like, do you want to be out there actually earning money, or do you want to be spending precious time doing this when you could be earning money?
But the other thing as well, particularly with schools, and I think, Lucy, I don't know whether you'll find this interesting or not, is when I try and sell my product to people, they often just want my company house registration number, because automatically that's like a validation. Or no, although technically it's not, it is a validation of like, oh, you've clearly gone through this process of structuring the company in a particular way. They almost, along with GDPR checks, they're very much just like, oh, that ticks a box, that ticks a box.
Yes.
Off you go.
And that's what this slide on the screen now is really sort of referring to, is it gives you a sense of credibility and reliability, because what they think is that you're basically a bit more of a grown up in doing that. They think because, you know, you've gone through
Lucy,
this process.
I wasn't saying that about you. Like,
no one never says that we're grown-ups, but it's a sense of credibility, and they need to check as well. And you'll also find that some companies will only deal with VAT registered companies as well because of that extra reporting. And basically the reason that companies do that and stipulate that you need to be some sort of company entity as opposed to a sole trader is because they have come back with HMRC. You are now under the guidance and watch of HMRC, if you like. In the same way that with schools, obviously there's a DBS check.
Yeah.
That is because it's removing that liability from that other company because somebody else is doing the due diligence checks.
And so registering a company and being VAT registered, you can have them separate. So I could register my company as an entity and trade through that company. And then if I do ever get to that threshold of becoming VAT registered, that's a separate thing again. So I could leave that perhaps like a year, 2 years down the line.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You
Okay,
don't
fine.
have to be VAT registered.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that
I thought,
briefly this later,
I'll shut up now.
but you will cover it in detail in the accounts section, because that will talk to you about VAT. So that's slightly different to the legal entity. That's an accounting entity, if you like. So prestige is about, do you look better? Are people happier if you're a company than a sole trader? So you find this in a lot of industries. We work a lot with regulated industries where they won't deal with sole traders. Sorry. Phone's on silent, please, Adrian.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm always on call.
So prestige is a thing as well. And from a marketing point of view, there's a lot more credibility for limited companies than there are for sole traders, because of the protections, because of the liability, and because people believe that it's complicated to set up a limited company, which I'm going to prove to you it's not, and it's onerous to have a limited company, which I'm going to prove to you it's not. They believe that you will have ticked all the other boxes like insurance and due diligence and processes and procedures and all the rest of it, which you possibly have done. Lots of people haven't. So the onerous part of being a limited company, I have found in my 8 years, is totally and utterly false.
Yeah.
Okay. There are reporting requirements, and there's no reporting requirements other than the taxman to the sole trader. And you'll go through that next time in the finance section as well. You need to have certain documentation, so memorandums and articles, shareholders agreements, that you don't as a sole trader, because you don't need to have any. And there's a lot of people out there who started off just cleaning for their next door neighbour, for example, or doing the shopping, who now are micro providers or running a cleaning company, still as sole traders, because they've just grown, they've just got busier and filled their hours. They have no documentation that they need to submit other than their self-assessment to HMRC. Whereas as a limited company, you have memorandums and articles, you have shareholders agreements, you have dividend agreements, you have directors agreements, and all sorts of other things. However, I will show to you in a minute, all of those could be downloaded free of charge for you. And there so you don't need to come and try and write all of those. They are all there for you.
Yeah, and just with my sort of legal hat on again, when it comes to shareholders agreements, it really does depend upon the makeup of your business as to whether you require that at all. It is quite possible to have a limited company which only has one director. I'm the only director of my business, for instance, and so therefore I'm not going to have a shareholders agreement with myself, am I? So there is obviously that to think about. When it comes to partnerships, I would always be suggesting that you have some sort of partnership agreement, simply because where in practice I saw most of the disputes, it's when a partnership breaks up. And if you don't know how things are going to be divvied up and you are a partnership, then you can get yourself into quite some hot water. So I would always suggest that you have a partnership agreement of some level, and you can get some really, really basic ones, actually. So you don't have to spend an awful lot of money on that. But I think that's really important for the partnership model.
Can I ask a question? When you did your business plans, in your business plan model, is there a section for your exit strategy?
No.
Yes.
No, yes, no. So an exit strategy is really, really important as well when you're setting up either as sole trader, because you can be 3 sole traders running a business together, all as sole traders, or as a limited company, to have that exit strategy. So as well as your shareholders agreements, if there's more than one director or anything like that, is what happens when you want out, or when one of you wants out, what happens next? So consider your exit strategy. Is it to sell your business? Is it to wind it down? Can it continue without you? Because when we come on to the second half of this in a few minutes and we talk about IP, we're going to be talking about who owns what in your business as well. So just make a note to yourselves about your exit strategy, because although you're all starting out and it seems like I'm being really, really pessimistic, wouldn't it be great if we're all like Richard Branson or someone like that, and within a few years we've made our millions and we can sell it for lots and lots of money? That's your exit strategy as well. But it's important to consider what happens. And when it comes to having a limited company, those questions are a lot simpler than when you're a sole trader as well.
So as a married couple, would we need a shareholders agreement?
If you're both directors of a company or you're both sole traders running the same one, yes.
I would say definitely, not least because I'm afraid sometimes marriages go wrong.
What?
We're going to have to divorce him and he'll have to sell me his half of the company.
And where we see things go horribly wrong is when a marriage breaks down and with it the business starts to fail or fall apart.
And particularly if you're working from home and one of you stays in the house and the other one has to move out, can that person be allowed back into the house for the purpose of the business? I'm loving the fact that Martin is just waving goodbye to Julia. But okay, right. So what we'd like you to do now is go away. We're going to have a bit of a short break. We're going to come back at 11 o'clock. Okay, so 20 minutes. Whilst you're getting your coffee and slice of toast or whatever it is that you feel you need, because we've drained the life out of you talking about legal stuff, is to come up with some pros and cons from your own perspectives about the sole trader versus limited company, or your own to Kieran, why you've chosen the CIC, what your pros and cons were as well. And we're going to come back at 11 o'clock, and when we come back, we're just going to share for just 5 minutes what our thoughts are around that as well. There will be time at the end of this session to ask us any questions that you want to as well, and to have our contact details if you want to ask us anything offline as well. Okay, so if we come back in 20 minutes. Okay, Neil's saying some marriages go right too. That is absolutely true as well, Neil. We will not be pessimistic. Some of them are the strongest businesses going.
Absolutely.
So if we could come back at 11
for 15 years here, so obviously.
I've got my 20th anniversary in a few weeks, so yeah, I've got to be nice about that one as well. But they say second time lucky. We're going to go away. We'll see you in 20 minutes. Come back at 11, please. Okay, we're going to switch the camera and the sound off. So if you want to carry on talking, that's up to you. And we'll see you back here in shortly. Choose a company name. But what we wanted to talk about, because we didn't talk about it in very much depth before coffee, is Adrian wants to talk to you about shareholding, because it could be that that's something that some of you will need to consider.
Yeah, I mean, it's very simply, if you're operating a limited company as an individual, you're likely not only to be a director but also a shareholder, and it's entirely up to you as to how you might divvy out the shares. And then when you set up a company, it's notional. You have to have shareholders. So you give a value to the share, which could be, or number of shares, which could be anything from £1 to whatever you want, really. I'm just thinking particularly with some of you, whereby you're in this kind of quasi partnership type arrangement, that you might be wanting to think, well, actually, how might that work between us? Because what you don't necessarily want is a 50-50 shareholding, because that's when issues can arise in themselves. Because if one of you wants to go in a certain direction and the other one wants to go in a different direction, you can get into a logjam. You can get into a bottleneck whereby a decision which is critical to the business isn't actually made. So you need to think about that. And again, looking at your exit strategy, you might end up in a situation whereby one shareholder wants to sell, the other shareholder doesn't. And if you speak to a commercial lawyer about this, they'll talk about all sorts of rights that you can write into a shareholders agreement, drag along rights, this sort of thing, whereby actually one party can force the other one to sell. All of those things, as you go through, perhaps need to be explored if you're dealing with more than one shareholder.
It's very similar to when you purchase a house, whether you're tenants in common or joint tenants, and it's that same sort of consideration about being able to sell half a house or a whole house, who owns the different elements of it. So it's a really important thing to do, because your business after your house is most likely to be your biggest asset in your life if you get it right. So it's worth giving it the due consideration on that. Right. Heavy stuff done. Now we're going to talk about choosing company names and have a bit of fun, okay? So some of you may have already come up with names and some of you may not have done. And some of you may have come up with names and decided that actually that's not a good name. And some of you might have spent days and weeks and months trying to think of a really good name, only to find that someone else has got it, because very few thoughts are unique. And that's where I found myself wanting to set up a marketing company and wanting to have a really, really clever name. And then realizing in one of those light bulb moments that because I was trying to do something that included marketing jargon, the only people that would get it were other marketeers, and clearly they're not going to be my customers. So I went through this whole kind of process of trying to work out the best way of choosing a company name. And I'll tell you my story in a minute on how I actually came up with my name, because it doesn't follow any logic whatsoever, but it's I find it quite an amusing, ironic story. So things to consider when you're choosing your name is, what does it talk about your business? Okay, does it tell people what you're doing or what you're planning on doing or what you're delivering? Because people need to know and need to be able to find you easily and understand what you're doing. What does it say about you? You know, is it grown up? Does it have the right reputation to match what you're doing? So, for example, Joe, when you're working with schools and children and, you know, people like that, and Julia and Martin, when you're working with vulnerable adults and children and people in care, does it say the right thing about your reputation? Is it trustworthy? Does it project the right message? And then also think about, should it include your name? Because talking about what we've just discussed about potentially selling your company, how easy is it to sell a company that's called Joe Reynolds Marketing compared to something that's called Justel Marketing? Because Joe Reynolds Marketing is always linked to Joe Reynolds, and Peter Piper isn't going to want a company with my name on it. So is it transferable? And transferability also relates to what happens if you start up doing one thing and you need to move to another, or you expand your services. Is there enough scope in your name to cover those things? So these are all things that you should consider. There's a few examples on this slide of names that are kind of wrong. Okay, and some of them are wrong for very, very wrong reasons. Some of them are just very funny. Which one's making you laugh?
Selfridges.
Yeah,
Butcher Funeral Home.
Butcher Funeral Homes. I mean, that's just classic. And do you want to have your new house built by construction? You know, I'm sure that is someone's initials. It doesn't also help that in their logo they've got the arrow pointing down, which doesn't give a very positive message either, does it? But if anyone can read the back of that van, that's.
I mean, that's a red flag, isn't it? For sure.
Yeah. You don't want to.
I'm just reporting them for that alone.
That's true. A real company as well.
Is it?
That's a real company that is currently trading.
Just makes me think of the child catcher van in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang.
Yeah, you know, Rolf Harris worked here type thing, isn't it?
Exactly.
You know, it's just not right. So these are some of the things where people have tried to be clever. Sorry?
Someone was going to say Rolf Harris.
Well, yeah, genuine true story here, just to digress for 30 seconds. One of my 3 big claims to fame used to be that I had a caricature drawn by Rolf Harris once when I was a kid. It doesn't really hold the same weight that it used to. That used to be quite a cool thing to say. It's not now.
No.
But
have you
all
tried
of
to sell
these
it on eBay?
No, I think my mother burnt it. Some of these people, Curl Up and Die, Selfridges, they tried to be clever. And clever is great if you get it right. But when you get it wrong, it can be a little bit cringy, can't it? You know, so it's worth having a look at that and thinking about it. And, you know, it's just an unfortunate coincidence, isn't it? If your family name is Butcher and you decide to be funeral directors, there's not a lot you can do about that. But it's worth then considering, should it have your name on it? So there's a bit of a checklist here for your names when you're thinking this and you're doing your brainstorm. And I want you to kind of like think about it as smile, because you want your customers to smile when they think of your company. That's what as marketers we want, is that sense of well-being, of security, of happiness, of all those positive emotions coming out. And they start with your company name and or your logo. So if it's suggestive and it evokes a positive brand experience, you know, Disney, for example, the ears on the mouse on their logo are very, very specifically there for a reason. If it's meaningful, do your customers get it? Do they understand what you're doing? You know, it's now called the Ron Seal effect. Do people know what you're doing? Imagery. So can you use the name in a very visual logo easily? Or is it really clunky and it just doesn't look right? Because when we look at the psychology of logos and branding, people see the shape first, the colours second, and the words last. Because if I say to you, well, what's the McDonald's logo? You'll all know it's the golden arches. If I say to you, Starbucks, what can you tell me about the Starbucks logo?
Green
You're on
and
mute,
brown.
Joe.
Green and white and some weird mermaid thing.
Yeah.
That's about it.
Can you tell me where the text is in relation to that?
It's below, isn't it?
It's below, it's above, it's to the side, it's above,
Who
it doesn't
cares?
matter. If they move it, but that logo is there. But we see the colours first. What about Domino's Pizza?
Pizza slice, isn't it?
No.
No.
No, it's
It's a domino. It's the actual
pie,
domino.
isn't it? It's like
Yeah,
It's a domino, of course it is.
It's a domino.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what colour it is?
Red and blue.
Red and blue. Can you tell me whether the word Domino's has an E in it or not?
Yes.
No.
No.
No, you can't tell me, or no, it doesn't.
No,
No,
it
it doesn't.
doesn't.
It doesn't matter. There's a dyslexic researcher that's written a whole book, and what they've done is they've taken the first and last letter and they've kept them the same, and they've mixed up everything else in between. And most people can just pick up that book and continue to read it without knowing that the book is messed up. And it's because, which I don't think is necessarily directly linked to this, but it sort of shows you the power of, it doesn't really matter unless you consider those things like the color, the logo, and it's put together.
Exactly that.
There's loads of like social media stuff around that as well, Joe, isn't there? Where you know you read the first and last letter of the word,
right.
And then your brain fills the rest in, and that's it.
Yeah, you can skim read relatively quickly, and it can be, like you said, there can be like spelling mistakes and things like that in the middle, which obviously if there's one spelling mistake you tend to highlight that, but if there's multiple it doesn't really matter, you sort of skim straight over it. Obviously if you're an educational brand, having lots of spelling mistakes isn't a good thing, but in a logo I suppose you can play on those.
I used to work as a proofreader for a gardening magazine, and when the first time I read anything proofread, you read from the bottom right upwards, because then you're reading backwards. You're not second guessing what the next word is going to be. So I always proofread backwards, then you proofread the margins, and then you read the article. And that's a sort of standard practice. And that's because we're actually cleverer than we think we are, and our brains are like predictive text, really. They know what's going to come next. So we don't notice that sort of thing, which is why there'll be typos in this presentation that we're giving you that we've read 1,000 times and we'll still have missed one of them. But Domino's is a really interesting bit on your naming and your brand bit. You'll know the colours, you'll know that it's, you'll expect a pizza slice perhaps, or you'll know that it's the domino. But 70% of people believe that there is an E in the words, because that is the dictionary way of spelling the plural of domino. But actually what they're talking about is Domino's with an apostrophe S, but they dropped the apostrophe because it looked like the domino was leaking on their logo. So it's the evolution of a brand. But don't get me started. I could spend 3 hours just talking to you about logos and doing some fun logo quizzes with you from the 1980s where you never knew that that was the logo for Bros, the band, and things like that. So don't get me started on that. Things to think again: if your name is spelling, if it's challenged, it looks like a typo. There was a knitting shop locally here in Somerset, and because they wanted to call it Woolly Wonders because of a love of sheep and it fitted with the wool and everything, they decided to put OOLLE even though it was wrong. It looked like a typo because there was another company in Bridgewater that was called that as well. So they just dropped a letter and it just looked like they'd got a big typo across all their sign writing. Copycat, you can have a name that is similar to another name, but I don't suggest calling yourself Disney's or something like that. If they are significantly well known, it's not always clever to try and pick up their traffic in your name. Absolutely pick up their traffic other ways, but not like that.
Or Selfridges.
Yes.
Selfridges for that matter.
Yes, they're not clever.
And there was another one locally. It was a garage, and they were using the 2 R's of the Rolls-Royce logo, and they got hammered as well.
And a local brewery in Devon got done for naming its brewery the brand of another local brewery's beer, but putting a space in between, and they actually had a whole cease and desist and had to rebrand that complete brewery.
Didn't Oatly, the oat milk brand, they got slammed by it was like a weird little farmer somewhere in Scandinavia, and they were a massive multi-million-pound company, and from the get-go they hadn't done enough of a check on it, and their share prices have gone literally down to, they've lost like 90% share price, and it's I'm sure it's other things as well, but it was a huge lawsuit just to do with their name.
Absolutely. We're going to have a look at how you name it on the next slide. Also consider how restrictive your name could be. So when I started my company, I just called it Justel Limited because I didn't know if it was going to be admin, if it was going to be business, if it was going to be marketing. I didn't know if I was going to be a cleaner. I just called it something that had scope for growth. Okay, and this might answer in some ways your question, Lucy, a little bit, is making sure it's not too restrictive. Now, you can also have a company name that is, for example, like Justel Limited, like mine was, and then underneath it have Justel Marketing, Justel Training, Justel Consultancy, without registering all of those. As long as you have the domains and they are not needed, you don't need to trade as different companies. You can have an umbrella company with different divisions. So that might be the solution for you, Lucy. I'll show you how to check that in a second.
Yeah, this comes back to your trading as point. There's no need to register the trading as.
No.
When you can you sort of clarify domain? Are you talking?
I would clarify domain in a second for you. Okay.
Sorry, my head just goes automatic to website domains, and
that's exactly what I'm thinking of.
Okay, that's fine.
Okay. Think again if your name's annoying, if it's got a hidden meaning, or you're trying to be too clever. If it's just really flat and uninspiring, if it's just a bit meh construction, it doesn't inspire anyone, does it? If it's a curse of knowledge, so like my example, I was trying to be really, really clever with the name of my marketing company, but only other marketers who get it. They're not my customers. They're not going to be Googling me. And if they are, they're going to be Googling me to steal all my secrets, not to pay me money. And obviously, if it's hard to pronounce or it's not obvious as well. So, there's quite a lot of companies out there. Like, have you all seen the Hyundai adverts? I know it's not Hyundai, but for me, it will always be Hyundai. But it's Hyundai or something now, isn't it? And anyone who's ever shopped in IKEA, there's no chance of us ever pronouncing 50% of their products correctly. So, it's all right to have regional dialects. But if you're trying to be something to a particular subset of people, to your customers, make sure that your name fits them.
Yes.
It's more important it fits them than it fits you. Okay, so the practicalities of choosing a name is there's some checks that you need to go through. Okay, I'm going to pull up some websites in a minute and show you. So the first thing you do is you look on Companies House. This is if you're going down the limited company route, but it's also advisable if you're looking at sole trader route as well. You look at domains, and you will get all of these in the handout. Okay, so I'm going to bring up a different screen now and just talk you through it. So hopefully now you can see a government website.
Yep.
And forgive me if I'm suddenly looking like that because I've got 3 screens here and you're on that one and this is all on this one. So if I wanted to check the name of a company that I wanted to do, and I wanted to call it Clever Marketing Limited, I can type that in there and it will tell me if the company name is the same as somebody else's. Now, it doesn't matter whether I want to use LTD and the company is limited, I still cannot use that. So your first point of contact and your first checks should always be done on Companies House to check that your name does not exist there. Does someone want to throw me a name that they haven't registered yet that they're considering using?
CareerWise.
CareerWise, one word?
Yep. Limited.
Okay.
Well, to be doing as much
Right,
as
so there are no matches for CareerWise.
Mhm.
Okay, so you can use that. That's not registered on Companies House. And Companies House is a register of all the companies that are registered in the UK. Okay. So we take CareerWise Limited, and I'm going to copy that so I don't have to type it. And the next thing we do, Joe, is we go and we look at domains. And someone like 123reg is a really good place to have a look to see if your domain is registered. Because we know you can now register with Companies House and you can have your company. But there's no point in you having that name if somebody else has already got your domain, because that means you can't have the email address domain, you can't have the website. So carerwise.co.uk is available and you can buy it for 79 pence.
Mm.
.com.uk.org are all there.
Yep.
Okay, so CareerWise is a really safe name.
Mhm.
I'm going to put in APERS. So this is Adrian's company. So APERS Limited already exists because Adrian went through this process. And it will say that it's been incorporated there, and you cannot register your company with that same name. If we then put it into the domain, it will come up and it will say .co.uk is taken, but you can have these different variants of it. Now, what you have to consider here is it's perfectly all right if you wanted to have this domain that says apers.uk or apers.info, but people don't tend to write full website addresses out anymore. They write the first bit like I've just done, APERS, and they see what comes up. So if your name is something like CarersWise and that say that the .co.uk had been taken and you thought I'll just have the .com, are you inadvertently sending people to your competition? Because if your name is doing what it says on the tin, then chances are the other company is also doing something quite similar. Okay.
It's a good point.
Now, lots of people, do you understand the difference between your domain and your company name?
Yes.
Yeah. Does everyone understand that? So your domain is how you're found online. Your company name is what you're registered as.
Can
You
I make a suggestion as well that if you sorry, you might just be about to say this. So
right.
if you've registered apers.com, am I pronouncing that right? APERS,
Yeah.
and then .co.uk or .info, and if they're only 79p, I would probably just purchase them all, and then
Yes,
your web designer or whoever, it's very straightforward. Is you can you can redirect them to your main website.
yes,
so it's like a funneling effect essentially.
Yeah, it's called it's pointing the A records is what they do.
Right.
So it goes there. Yeah. So it's really, really easy. And yet, Neil, Fast Hosts works well, Namecheap, all of those are worth doing. So 123reg is the biggest one, Fast Hosts and domaincheck.co.uk is there. Now, what happens then if Adrian's registered apers.co.uk as his address and he's got the .com and he goes away on holiday and he forgets to renew it and someone comes in and swoops on it? What you can do then is you can go to Nominet with regard to the domain only, and Nominet can force that person to give up that domain if you can prove that you've got business there and that you've previously owned it. If you've not previously owned the domain, but you have the company named in that, you have no recourse at all with Nominet. But if someone basically steals your domain because you haven't set up automatic renewals, which I really suggest you do, for this very reason, then you do have some protection with Nominet, but it can take you 6 months or more to do that. So consider what happens if your website and your emails cannot function for 6 months. Do you still have a business at the end of it? So it's really, really important, in my very humble opinion, that not only do you check Companies House and that your company name is available, but you also make sure you check your domain is available, because having one without the other only gives you half a business. So when you're thinking,
I was going to say, is your domain name, is that Is that how you get your work email address?
Yes, that's your email, that's your website, that's your identity on social media. That's your visible, that's your marketing, if you like. Your company's house is your legal entity. That's how you're sat here, you know, just as a company in a box. That's your box, that's your thing. The domain is the core of your marketing.
So rather than having just like a Hotmail or Gmail account, you that has your a business name on it.
Yeah, yes. Because there are people who robots based over in India, China and Russia normally who will scour company's house for newly registered companies and then check domain names, and if they haven't been taken and reserved or bought, then they will buy that domain name and then they'll ask you for £100 or more. I had an insurance company I helped set up. He hadn't done all the .coms, .co.uk's, and as his business grew, he wanted them. He was basically had to pay £380 for a .com email address, where you could get it here for 79 pence.
Julie, I guess with your email address, so when you buy a domain, you're just buying the URL. Yeah. If you want an email address associated with that would be an additional cost. Yeah. So that 79p does not automatically give you a mailbox account. No. So let's say, for example, you buy your, what was it, Clever something? Yeah. So if you buy that domain for, let's say, £1, within that they'll try and bolt on things. They might say, well, you want to host your website, we'll give you a server for £10 a month. If you want a mailbox to go with that, then it'd be £5 a month, and then you can then specify what the extension might be. It might be Julie@ or info@. Yes. So just to make you aware, they're almost like bolt-on things. That's why I recommended Namecheap, because generally all those things are a little bit cheaper, and because you pay for those services monthly rather than you can pay them annually.
Sorry, who did you say recommend?
Namecheap.
Or any of those generally, but I personally use Namecheap because the domains are a bit cheaper, and then those services like mailboxes are generally cheaper. But what you can also do, and I'm waffling now, but instead of just buying their in-house mailbox, like 123reg's mailbox, you can then bolt on things like Office 365 services, which will be part of your domain. So you can have MS Teams, Outlook, all those things, and they will all come under your account, your Julie@ whatever.
Yes,
rather than buying them all separate, you can sort of buy them in as a bundle.
And you can do that with certain packages on 123reg and Fasthosts and all the rest of them. They all do a similar sort of thing. But yeah, you do shop around. The only caution I would say is, if we were to keep going into Carers Wise, which we're not going to do over a period of a few days, that price will go up because it's then being seen as being sought after. So the prices do change daily if people are starting to look for things, because these companies that have bought them and selling them are stupid. It's a bit like a car dealership where everyone's going to look at the one car on the forecourt. They're likely to not give you a discount on that because they know they've got demand for it. The other thing is
the domain will go up in value.
The domain will go up in value,
yeah, but the rest of those services, I don't want to confuse you, the rest of those services in the background, like your email and stuff, won't. That's generally
they sometimes do as well.
Oh, do they? Okay.
Yeah, but not generally. The other thing though is, if you're not sure whether you want Julie@, for example, by Carers Wise, no one else can buy the email with that domain, so you've protected that for the future. Okay.
Good job I'm not using that name now, because you put the price up.
Okay, so let's shut that screen down. And there's Fasthosted, Domain Check. There are loads of them. GoDaddy, a lot of the places like Wix. If you're building your website yourself on Wix or GoDaddy or Squarespace, you can build your website and you can buy the domain and all the Microsoft and everything else all through the website dealer as well. You tend to pay more for it that way, but it becomes a bit of a one-stop shop for you, which when you're trying to remember and set up so many things within a company, sometimes is a good way to start. Not always, but sometimes it's just simple.
Sorry,
Neil?
I used Wix for our website, and the domain names were quite expensive through that, so that's why I went through Fasthosts, and then you can just link your domain to Wix, the website
Yes.
builder. Basically, it's fairly easy to do. There's instructions and everything there, so it's not hard work.
It's not at all. They've all got clever and they all tend to work together. I did exactly the same when I started. I had a Wix website with FastHost doing the hosting as well. And there are deals out there and it's worth looking for those deals as well, because in the first year, you've got a lot to think about and a lot of costs. You can move things. It's very simple if you get to the stage where you need a professionally built website to get that done, and then they just change the A records, but make sure that you've got that hosting yourself. Okay, so how do you actually register a company? Now, some of you have been through this already and some of you haven't. So apologies to those who already have done. There are a number of different options. There's a self-serve option, which I'm going to show you. There's an accountant's option where your accountant will register everything and do it all for you. And it's not generally done by solicitors. It tends to be more the accountants because they do all the accounts and everything for it as well. And they need to know what you want before they do this for you. Okay. So I'm going to show you now how I registered my company and why I think that a self-service option is perfectly reasonable for everyone. This is a company called formationsdirect.com. There are lots of formation company portals like this. This is the one that I've used numerous times now for clients and friends and so forth. And in here, you would go in, and I'm not going to put carers wise again because I am now
Paranoid.
paranoid. Yes. Clever Business Advice Limited. Okay. When you click in there, you also check on here whether it's available, and they connect to Companies House to the search we've already done. So it comes up and it says, okay, this is available and I want to buy it. And you can buy that company for £18 plus VAT. So this is really useful, perhaps, Lucy, if in your situation where you're perhaps looking at self-employed but becoming a company in the future, is to spend simply £18 and it protects your name for when you're ready to move from that self-employed status to that limited company. Because, for example, if you're trading as Clever Business Solutions or whatever it was I just put in there, then you do that self-employed for 5 years and you get to a stage where you want to employ people and you want to do other things and you go, actually, I want to get ready to sell this. And you go to look for the limited company and it's not available. You've got to rebrand your whole company to be able to keep your own company name. So this £18 package here is a really, really good way of protecting that name for the future. If you're not ready to start trading as a limited company, you buy this, you register it as dormant with Companies House, and every year you pay £13 to submit a confirmation statement saying that you're still keeping it dormant. And your name is protected then for when or if you need it, and no one else can buy that and set up in competition using your name. Okay, to me personally, it's a no-brainer. Then you have other packages here. So for small companies, there are two different packages. Okay, the one that I tend to use is this £68 one. And because what it does is it does your company house fee is included in that, your name checking, it's formed the same day. You can put in all the details of your directors or officers straight into here and you get everything sent. I do the £68 one because it also sends me a package with the hard paper memos in there with all your articles and your templates and everything in there. I know we should be paper free, but I like that bit where you open it and go, I've got a certificate that's got my name on it. You know, I like the shiny things, you know, and for me, that's really important. So I tend to do this because I like that paper register as well. When you register this, it also gets published that you are the director of that company. And that's pretty cool, actually, because we're doing this for an income, but we're also doing this for fun. So, it's very exciting. You get your e-certificates and your e-memos, and although it says it's a same day or 1 day dispatch, I've had paperwork come through in less than an hour, and that's really quite a cool thing, actually. So Formations Direct, you simply would click on here. I'm not going to go through all of it, but you could go through, you put in your email address, you go through the screens. It takes less than 10 minutes. The biggest time taken to do this is if your bank asks for 2-factor authorization on whatever you're using to pay for it. When it asks you, do you want a receipt? Say yes, because you can deduct that from your business's first costs. Because if you've paid for that out your personal bank account, you can reclaim it. It is an expense for your company to register your company, even if you haven't registered your company at the point of spending the money, if that makes sense. So keep your receipts, but it's all, if you get to VAT registration, it's all tax deductible. Okay.
So that £68 one, if you did that, are you live from then, or is that keeping you dormant still?
No, that's a live company.
Right.
Yeah.
If you purchased all that because you want all these other bits here, the memos and the articles, you can buy that. And then what you do is you register your log on HMRC's website, and you go and you tick a box that says make my company dormant. You know how, like, when we tax a car, if you've got a car that you want to put off the road, you just go in and you tick a box. It's a very similar process, but for a business. So imagine you're doing it for your car. This is like taxing your business, basically, like you tax your car. Okay. This is the company that I use. Now, the other thing that I like on here is that they have this service called Off the Shelf, and they will tell you, and it's not come up with any luck. Typical, isn't it? Is normally here. I don't know why it's doing this. Let's see if I refresh the screen. No. Normally here, and this is where my company name came from, they have a list of names that they've already pre-registered that you can buy off the shelf. So rather than having to think of a name, you can get some inspiration here as well. And that's exactly what I did. So for some reason, possibly because I'm not logged in, I can't buy an off the shelf one here, but normally there's a big list here. Another reason for using this is that they offer partnerships with banks. So if you haven't set up your business bank accounts, you can fast track a bank account. So you're basically pre-approved, subject to any big markers on your credit history. And at the touch of one button, your bank account gets set up in line with your company being set up. And for a lot of these, particularly with Lloyds and Cash Plus, you get cash back straight into your account. When I set up my company, I did it, the offer was with Barclays Bank. I paid £68.80 or whatever it was 8 years ago, but roughly the same amount. And I got £300 cash back paid straight into my Barclays brand new bank account. So my business registering on this made me a profit of over £200.
So what stops you then from then closing down that business and pocketing the money? There must be some terms.
You have to keep it live for the first year. You can't keep doing it, otherwise that would be an income stream just in its own.
Otherwise, that's my business.
This is the solicitor talking, folks. Okay, so if you haven't already got a bank account, and even if you're a sole trader, you ought to have a separate bank account. It's worth looking at these as well, unless you've got strong reasons not to use a particular bank. These are sometimes a very quick way of getting that bank account set up, and you normally get a bank business manager contact you quite quickly as well to talk you through anything else you need to know.
Just for information, when I set up a year ago, I went with Monzo Bank, and they provided a 3-year subscription to Xero, which was really, really useful. Yeah. So there's all sorts of different offers out there, as you might expect, but I found that one particularly useful simply because we all need that kind of software. And the cost of Xero, which is an account software that you'll probably find out about in a fortnight's time, is somewhere in the region of £25 to £30 a month for the basics setup. So there's some really good deals there. And companies like Formations Direct make the process very, very straightforward. So even if you want to trade as a sole trader, I would suggest spending that £18 to protect your name for the future, just because it gives you options. Yeah. Okay. Any questions on that? Blinding. Brilliant. We're either doing really, really well at this, or you're all actually asleep and watching the cricket on a separate screen. Is there cricket today?
Cricket will send me to sleep. Sorry, but...
Oh no, I love my cricket. Don't get me to a cricket debate. Don't get me season ticket holder to the local cricket at Taunton. Don't get me into that debate. Right, I'm going to pass over to Adrian now, who's going to tell you about how you've now got your company, you've got your name, you know what your entity is going to be. What do you need to do next?
Okay, so very quickly, what do we reckon intellectual property is?
Your idea.
Protecting your idea, protecting your name.
Possibly.
No.
Any other ideas? Any other thoughts?
Doesn't it have to be something unique?
Nothing physical?
No, not necessarily.
It could be your product designs, your logos,
Yes.
your brand, your all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And why is it important to protect it?
Well, to try and attempt the Chinese not to copy it in fight.
Well, good luck with that one. I mean, this is where we end up sort of going into international law. But you're absolutely right. It's about trying to protect what is yours. But the difficulty with a global economy is that, as you mentioned, China, we are seeing more and more knockoff copies for which it's very, very difficult to actually protect against because the international framework just isn't there. But thankfully, I don't think we're into global espionage just yet. So I think in reality, it's really important that we just look at the fundamentals of what potential intellectual property you might have. So, I mean, again, wordy slide, but intellectual property is a category of property that includes intangible creations of human intellect. In fact, it also it goes broader than that because it's not necessarily the intangible. There is also the tangible. For example, a particular design of wood-burning stove, for instance, a new dog toy, you name it. All of those, if it has anything particular and not necessarily unique, but certainly of commercial value, then there is the opportunity to protect it in some way or other. Okay. So, as I say there on the slide, there are many types of different intellectual property, and there's all sorts of different protections that you can have. I'm going to sort of compartmentalize them in a minute. But the other thing, of course, to be aware of is that this can be an international issue. We're not only talking about UK patents, for instance, it might be a European patent, or it could be a worldwide patent. So there are all sorts of other things that one needs to think about. And within that, we also have to think about our trade secrets. And, even if we haven't actually put something out to market yet, perhaps if we've got a good idea, we really need to be thinking about how do I protect that idea? How do I stop that being in effect leaked to someone else so that they can actually poach the idea themselves? So there's all sorts of things that we need to be thinking about on that basis. Another question for you then: what is your intellectual property? So, just shout out what you think your own intellectual property is. It might be more. It might be easier for some of you because there is a product that you're thinking of, as opposed to a service or design. But let's just have a think. Let's just think about what sort of intellectual property we might actually be talking about.
Well, it's everything, isn't it? That relates to a design of something that's tangible, isn't it? It could be drawings, could be CAD drawings, could be all your concept drawings, your concept modeling, your pre-production prototyping, all this sort of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about text? What about
everything that goes with it, anything surrounding it? Always record it, post it to yourself, stick it on a stick, and all that sort of stuff. Keep it in the safe. The one thing you got to remember is that if something's been done before, you possibly can't patent it. But also, even if you did go through the expensive route of patenting, you then need, an enormously fat pocket to fight any legal battles, or if it's challenged. So you've got to take a view on that.
couldn't put it better myself. So with regards to all of you, what things specific to your business do you have in mind with regards to actually this is my property and I want to, or at least I need to think about protecting it?
Recipes, logos,
Yeah.
Image rights, branding.
Yeah.
Mm.
What about
Branding?
What about the text on your website?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yeah.
How do you go about protecting that? Because particularly at the moment, especially with the rise of ChatGTP, is that they scour the internet and
wow, this is a
scrape
really
your...
interesting area if you're a
I
nerd
know.
like me.
The same for me, it's really, really complicated to actually protect, because as soon as you publish a website, it's out in the domain, and you've got people like Google and other search engines, they're crawling the internet, scouring and scraping your information and indexing it.
You're absolutely right.
It's not just your information, is it? It's like thousands and thousands.
Oh yeah, but that's what I mean.
Everyone's, yeah.
But if the question is us trying to protect, let's say I write a blog article to do with my website to promote it as marketing, how can I protect that from being stolen or being used or manipulated?
There's a huge debate going on because obviously plagiarism on the web is now a very, very real thing. And, you know, if you look at educational facilities, if you look at all of those sort of commercial enterprises and aspects, there are all of those potential scraping mechanisms whereby, yes, they can actually take your data. But I think this is where it's really important that we actually look at the categorization of data and how we actually protect it and whether we actually have to do anything to protect it. All right. Mm-hmm. If we look at this broadly, we're talking copyright, trademarks, or patents. There are additional protections which I'll come on to in a minute, but broadly, those are the main headlines. Do we have to do anything with regards to copyright? So, firstly, what am I talking about when I'm talking about copyrightable information?
Am I thinking it just too simply? Is that you're creating your company logo, your graphics, your text, your colours, all those things that Joe was talking about with regard to like Domino's. If then a company comes along in the town and tries to create, Domino pizza, just drops the S, but continues to use the same colour, a very similar logo, that essentially I'm just trying to rip off what Domino's are trying to do. I suppose that's the bit I don't really know is
okay.
Go on.
Let's break this down. If I write a story, so if I get my scenario, which we'll come on to later, I wrote that scenario a couple of hours ago. I automatically own the copyright to that because it is my scenario. Okay. So when you have text which has that little copyright symbol, a little C in a circle, that doesn't actually mean anything because everything that is produced by you is copyrighted automatically to you. You have that protection. So as long as you can say, I created this web content, you've got something which is automatically protected. All right. What Clyde said is really interesting because it all comes down to enforceability. So in essence, yes, you might be able to say, actually, that was my text. But are you going to be able, and is it worth you actually fighting a legal fight over the content of that text? And probably not. If, however, it were a book that I had written about the joys of being an employment lawyer from 2000 to 2023, it'd be a very short book, I hasten to add. But if I had written that book, then it would have been my copyright. And therefore, if someone else publishes it, saying it's their work, of course I've got a right of action. So there are degrees to that. All right. So you've got that. Then we've got trademarks. What do we mean by a trademark?
Your logo.
Yes. And I think, Joe, you were on the right lines as far as this was concerned.
Yep. Trademark as well in different countries, don't you?
Yeah,
about the brand, isn't it?
it's more about the branding. Okay, so the Domino's, the domino trademark, as it were, you know, what you would ultimately identify as being the brand of Domino's is their trademark. Now, in the eyes of the law, there are two mechanisms of protection. There's the registered route, whereby you tend to get a little RT or a T in a circle, which says this is a registered trademark, or there's unregistered trademarks. Okay, so if you have a really strong brand, what you might want to do is you might want to say, actually, this is a really strong brand which in itself has value. And as a result, therefore, I want to protect it and I will register it as a trademark. And you register it as a trademark with the Intellectual Properties Office. Doesn't cost you an awful lot of money, but it has to be fairly specific and unique. And what they will probably expect you to do is to break down the trademark. So, you know, it might be a given font. It might be the font of the Domino's and then the colours and all the rest of it. So you can protect all of that kind of property. And that has a huge benefit if it's registered to you, because again, it's an asset of the business that you could potentially sell. So if it becomes a really strong brand like Domino's, then you could actually sell that brand on. All right. And if you're looking at sort of franchising arrangements, for instance, there might be a huge advantage with actually having the ownership of that trademark. But there's also something called unregistered trademarks, which is you don't need to do anything. Rather like copyright, all you need to say is, I can prove that I got there first, that this is my brand. And if therefore someone tries to replicate that brand, you've potentially got an action in what they call passing off. So you could say, I can prove that I've been using this brand for the last 10 years. You've come in as a newbie to the market, and what you're doing is you are creating a brand which is very, very similar. It might not be absolutely identical, but it might look very, very similar. And as a result, therefore, I am entitled to go after you. All right. The huge advantage with registering a trademark is that it takes the dispute out of anyone's hands. They say, no, Adrian owns the APAS brand, therefore Adrian has the rights to it. And therefore, if you infringe that, there is compensation to be paid. All right. But that all depends upon the value of your brand. So what do we mean by patents then? Starter for 10.
Isn't a patent like a design idea?
Yes.
Basically, so you've submitted to say that the design idea is my idea and no one else can copy it, basically.
Absolutely right. It's a very, very technical area. And I'm going back to my university days when I did intellectual property as an elective. But the number of, the amount of complication involved cannot be understated, because it might be that your overall design is something which can't be patented, but there might be an aspect of that design which can be. So it's all very, very technical stuff. But what I would say is, and you've probably heard all of this from the likes of Dragon's Den, for instance, if you don't properly protect a product, a physical product, then there is very little to prevent someone bigger within the marketplace swooping in and actually going, do you know what, I like that, I'll use that, I'll develop it myself and I'll develop it cheaper. So quite often with the likes of Dragon's Den, you'll have a whole conversation about, well, what is the business and what protection do you have for your particular product? And why is it that I can go onto a website and already get something which is cheaper elsewhere? All right. So what's really important is that we have a think about how it is that we can actually protect each of our elements. But what about ideas? You know, you've all got great ideas. Can you protect that in some way, shape, or form?
Yeah, I don't know.
Aren't they part of your IP?
They can be part of your IP, but the difficulty is if you have a really good idea, how do you say, actually, that was my idea? You know, I came up with a online chat facility which Microsoft has taken on now and called Teams. How do I actually demonstrate that that was my idea and that actually they've taken that idea and they haven't arrived at that independently?
Record it and post it to yourself. Put it on a memory stick. Something that's dateable, something that can, you know, mark a time spot to it and a location perhaps or whatever, but something that identifies it with you at the point of creation.
Okay, but what it's Microsoft worth to then say, listen, we've got 100,000 developers, and it just happened that we developed exactly the same thing at around the same time.
Settle out of court for loads of money.
Yeah.
Exactly. Lawyers are the only winners again, and so
Yeah.
you've got to be realistic about how you actually protect your ideas. And Clive, I think you actually hit on a really good thing, which is, for heaven's sake, keep some decent records of what you're doing, because at least you've then got an argument, particularly if they knock on your door and say, actually, you're nicking our idea. All right. But we've got to really think about what it is and where the risks lie, which takes us on to our next slide. And I call this the enemy within and the enemy without. The enemy within are the people who you share your idea with. So it might be members of your family, it might be investors and shareholders, it might be other colleagues. Then you've also got the enemy without, which is anyone else who knows about what you're doing. Okay. So again, we've got to be very, very careful about what we really do to protect our ideas and ensure that it's on a need-to-know basis. How do we do this? Well, the enemy within, as things develop, you're going to have conversations with, you know, other like-minded individuals. You're going to be thinking about how you develop your range of products or services, how you take that forward to market. And what I would always say is you need a decent NDA, non-disclosure agreement, so that when you have those sort of conversations with any potential business partner or other associate, you can say, this is confidential, and if I find that you've disclosed this elsewhere or you've used this information to your advantage, I can go after you. All right. So a simple NDA is a really sensible tool. And again, it doesn't have to cost you an awful lot of money, and you can probably put into ChatGPT. I always get that wrong. Give me a decent NDA UK law, and it will probably spout one out for you. So I would always say that prevention is better than cure. The other thing is restrictive covenants. All right. So in essence, what you may have is people working alongside you. You might in time have your own employees, or for that matter, your own shareholders or directors. And as part and parcel of the arrangements that you have with them, you will want a restrictive covenant, which says you will not take our trade secrets, you will not use our trade secrets, you will not compete against me. There are tight rules regarding that, but I would always suggest that if you're sharing information, you need to have both of those documents in mind. And the enemy without, i.e. Nigel down the pub. What do we do about Nigel down the pub? Well, we keep our mouths shut. We don't discuss our great idea with Nigel, because we just know that he's the sort of guy who will actually take your idea and run with it. All right? So there's a lot of common sense here.
While you were talking about this, I just Googled, and there are plenty of NDA templates on the web.
Yeah.
I just found one, I think it was called the Law Depot or something like that. Yeah, the Law Depot. And there's numerous,
absolutely,
you know, types of NDA, depending on whether it's technical or, you know, whatever it is. You know, there's loads
absolutely
of
right. It's good. And if you're a member of something like the FSB or your Chamber of Commerce as well,
Yeah,
then they
they'll
quite
get them
often
to
have
help
those
that.
for you as well. One of the things that's probably worth just jumping in quickly, and I promise Adrian I won't jump in too much, is Julia and Martin, you're developing an app. You should have an NDA with your app developer and web developer.
One of the things we were going to bring up with him in about half hour.
Yeah, because there's nothing that stops him taking your idea and running with it himself.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay, so be really, really careful. It's kind of like that whole adage, trust no one. What was that off X-Files, wasn't it? Or something like that, I think, back along. Show my age now. Okay, but it's worth having that bit of paperwork.
Adrian, just a quick question. I heard through, this is just, hearsay. I heard that, and I've signed and sent over loads of NDAs in my career, but I've heard that they're not really worth it. Is that not true? They are worth it. They are kind of, can you it's a bit like the copyright. Can you defend them, and can you?
They're a lot better. They're a lot better than not having anything at all. It always comes down to the strength of the evidence. But clearly, if you can actually say, I disclose this information to so-and-so, and as a result, so-and-so has become involved with another business developing something very similar, then you've got a decent shot at protecting that intellectual property. Again, very, very fact sensitive. But NDAs are used in the legal world day in, day out, and there's a reason for that.
Thank you.
So I think I've dealt with what they are. Sorry, if we just go back a second. Other intellectual protection clauses. Again, when it comes to employing people, when it comes to actually having more formal relationships with other individuals that you're doing business with, what I would always recommend is that you have an intellectual property clause within any given supply or service contract, or employment contract for that matter. And that basically fixes the intellectual property as yours and gives you the right to, if they try to nick it, to get it back off them. And again, you will probably find that you can get a lot of those sort of clauses online. I would always suggest that you get it checked out by someone who's half competent to make sure it's enforceable. But again, that doesn't need to cost you an awful lot of money, and certainly provides a lot of heartache if ultimately you find yourself in dispute with a business partner, etc. So what if everything goes wrong then?
Do web providers provide their own that we sign, or do we have to give him one?
Normally I would expect you to give them one, simply on the basis that it is you who is trying to protect your information. I am aware, however, that some providers say, do you know what, that's absolutely fine. You're a small business. We deal with lots of small businesses. We'll give you one of our standard NDAs, and as long as you're happy with it, then we can be confident moving forward, because it's likely that they've dealt with it more than you.
Well, we've already contacted this guy and had to give him the basics to get him to get some facts and figures together. So, if he wanted to, he could be shouting it to the world already.
Absolutely.
And that's always a risk.
Yeah.
But you have to hope that the majority of people out there have the same moral compass as we do, and that they wouldn't do that to you. And unfortunately there are some people that don't, but the instances are quite rare. But what we're talking about is just making sure of that. And again, this links in with, if you're setting up a limited company to do this, if you don't have your intellectual property of that limited company protected, then it can seriously affect your resale value of your company if you do come to sell it or get investment and so forth. Again, like Adrian says, consider what they say on the Dragon's Den. We know we watch that a bit tongue in cheek, and lots of people think that it's a bit all put on, but there's a lot of advice comes out of that about making sure you've got your ducks in a row and your intellectual property is yours. Okay.
Yeah, and certainly the question which is always asked on that show is, well, what is your business? What are you trying to get us to invest in? And I think if you get into that mindset of saying, actually, I need something which is tangible, whether you're providing a service, an app, or whatever else it might be, what is it that this business actually comprises of, then you can't go far wrong, particularly if you put protection in place.
It's a bit like if you imagine your business is a box, what goes in that box?
Yeah.
Because you want to be able to give that box to somebody else. Okay, or sell that box to somebody else, or ask somebody to invest so you can get a bigger box. So just imagine your business as a box, and all these things that we're discussing and all the other trainers and mentors will be discussing as well. Okay.
Yeah, and the other thing to make clear is, obviously you don't need to be on Dragon's Den to have those same questions fired at you. If you're asking for a loan from any kind of business angel, bank, you name it, they're likely to want to know what it is that you actually own. All right. Yeah. So what if it all goes wrong? Now, this is a little bit of a, I guess, tongue-in-cheek point, but what if it all goes wrong? You're going to end up either on the receiving end or wanting to make a claim against someone else, because presumably if it's of value, you will want to ultimately enforce your rights and get the best back from someone who has wronged you. It is always a cost benefit analysis because, surprise, surprise, lawyers are expensive. And in essence, what you really need to be thinking about at this stage is, how do I make my life as easy as possible? So if my design takes off, if my app takes off, if my service becomes something which is really marketable and of value, what have I done which will be a slam dunk if someone tries to say, actually, you have either infringed our rights or tries to nick your idea? And this comes back to what Clive says, which is, it's all about the evidence, but better still, you gild that evidence with whatever protections you might be able to put in place, whether that be trademarking, patenting, you name it. But, you know, start small and think small, because you're growing. So I'm not saying immediately go in there and trademark your logo, because at the moment your logo isn't worth an awful lot. But as hopefully you expand, hopefully as you get bigger, and your brand gets larger, then I would certainly start thinking about, actually, now's probably the time to start protecting what I'm doing in a more formal way.
So could I ask a quick question?
Yes, by all means.
I was just having thoughts about the sort of the intellectual rights of the way you do business. So we're talking about the apps. I mean, my business is connecting people together. I'm in the sort of in the social enterprise market, but there is a commercial entity doing a similar thing. Where's the sort of, could they argue I was infringing them? And similar to Julie, I mean, their kind of idea again is about connecting people together. I mean, other people are doing similar things. Where could somebody else raise a problem for you?
I think it's highly unlikely that they could within that sphere, simply on the basis that electronic connections, bringing people together, social media is such a common entity now that there's no way that they could actually say, actually, this is our idea and you're actually poaching you're infringing on our rights. It's more the methodology of behind as to how you do that. So, for example, if you were to use a given algorithm, that the algorithm is copyrighted, but equally that in itself could be patented. But the likelihood of you actually using that kind of unique tech, I think, is very, very unlikely.
And the fact is, you've probably bought in tech that is on open market tech.
Absolutely.
And you're branding it your own way. So your bit is to promote your brand. Could it stop somebody coming into you if you started to encroach on their customer base? Probably they might try, but they would have to prove that they had exclusive rights to that tech, which if it's open source, what they won't have. That you've done a very high percentage of your activity is a direct copy of their activity. and your approach, your people, your target audience, your locale can all come into that. You know, it's not. We've painted a really bleak picture here because we want you to be like a super protected, but the likelihood of it happening is relatively small for the majority of us. It's just about protecting your business in the best way possible. The likelihood of someone coming in and doing something hideous to you or trying to take you to court is relatively small, because largely from what Clive said, because of those costs and the prolonged nature of that whole process. I mean, but it's important to be aware.
I mean, with tech, whenever you use a piece of tech which is available online, you're signing up to a licensing agreement. And what that licensing agreement is basically saying is, for the sum of money that you pay over to use that tech, you're allowed to use that tech however you see fit. So that is beyond argument as far as I'm concerned. Where you're likely to get perhaps unpleasant letters is if, for example, you use the Rolls-Royce logo. If you do something which is obviously going to create what they call confusion in the marketplace by way of how you're presenting your business, so that others think actually this must be part and parcel of Rolls-Royce or another entity. Or the other thing is, if you're making a copy or something which is very similar to something which is already on the market and which is subject to a patent. But the likelihood of you being in that situation, I would have thought, is fairly small. And I was thinking when we were when I was just preparing for this earlier, I mean, one of the businesses here are in the drinks industry, and how does one protect your beverage? And again, that's a very difficult thing to do. Although, if you're operating to a recipe, then that recipe is yours. Clearly, again, you've got a very strong brand there, so you can protect that. Does that necessarily prevent a competitor back engineering your beverage, looking at its component parts and copying it? No, it doesn't. And again, this is where we tend to find issues arising in practice.
Yeah. We're going to move on quickly now because we're already 21 minutes over the time we should have finished. Because as I said, Adrian and I like to talk, and you've been great asking all these questions. So I'm going to flash up the scenario quickly and then break for Q&A. But Julie and Sally also have our details as well. So if you wanted to contact either Adrian or me outside of this, then we're very happy for that to happen as well. So we're just going to look very quickly at this scenario, and what we'll do is we'll go through it together. We were planning on thinking we had a bit more time than this to send you away, but if you just read what's on there about Bill, who wants to start a business, he has an idea about creating a new type of non-spill mug for disabled people, and he has someone who wants to invest in the business and has thought a name for it called the iMug. He knows you've been on this course and wants to understand a little bit more about what you should be thinking about. So what would you tell him, given what we've told you? What legal entity do you think would be best for his business, his future? No, I think we've killed them, Adrian. They've all gone.
I thought that was a question for after the break. Sorry.
No, we're not having a break. This is the end of it, Kieran.
Okay, so
we're over timing already.
The legal entity should be a CIC, because then he can get funding because it's for disabled people.
Yeah.
He should get a patent, and he should really change the name.
Very succinctly and accurately put.
I agree, absolutely. I mean, certainly with regards to the possible legal entity, given that he's dealing with disabled people and given that it's potentially fairly high risk, I would always suggest that it's either a CIC. I think CIC is absolutely spot on, but at least a limited company. Protecting his invention and name, yes, definitely look at how he protects his invention. The name you're absolutely spot on with. iMug, anything is likely to be Apple owned. So he's going to have some difficulties there. and any potential issues over his proposed name I've just mentioned.
Yeah, you just have, yeah. You're repeating yourself.
I am repeating myself.
There we go.
But I charge by the word, so it's all right.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Typical solicitor. Okay, right. So today, hopefully, we've looked at comparing some different legal entities and helping you select the right one for your business. We've shown you how to register your company correctly, how to choose the right name or brand for your company, and how this can affect perceptions made by your customers, how to check the availability of the names and domains, what intellectual property is and why it's important, and how to identify and protect your intellectual property. Are we in agreement that we've covered that, sometimes in a very lengthy and circular route, I'm afraid? Yeah.
Yep.
Fabulous. Okay, so we've got minus 24 minutes. Has anyone got any burning questions they want to ask today, or do you want